All right, folks, what I want to do today is run through a sample hybrid application, a very simple one, reusing some sample code we had done in JavaScript earlier in the year. My intent is to do something real quick and dirty just to show you how to put two activities side by side, how to put a web view in an activity, excuse me, and how to put pass information from the Java to the JavaScript and from the JavaScript to Java. To try and keep this video as short as possible, there's going to be periods where I pause and type in the code, and to keep the video short, I'm not going to show you all that. So I'll pause it, I'll put in some code, I'll explain what I did, and I'll move forward. Okay, so I already have up my Create Android project screen. So let's create a new project. Let's call it Sample Hybrid. I've got my default package there. So I'll go ahead and hit next to get started. I do recommend the minimum SDK being API 23 or later. You'll see I actually already have a Pixel device up that's API 26, but I recommend 23 or later. I'll talk a little bit about API levels. And I'm just going to start with this basic empty activity in this wizard here. So I selected that. We'll stick with the defaults, activity main. We'll click finish. And in a second, Android Studio is going to pop up and show us the window. Let me drag it into your view here, get her all lined up, and there we go. So we have a very basic activity right now. Of course, doesn't do anything. Again, to revisit what it actually creates for us, we have our Android manifest. All right, it launches our main activity. You see this intent filter. That's because Android's home screen application where you actually launch app is itself an app called the launcher app. So you're expressing that you have a main type activity for the launcher so it knows how to do the entry point into your program. We have our various Java files and our packages, which was our package name plus the name of our application, our main activity we already looked at here, and then our activity main, and there it pops up and shows us our empty activity. At this point, we have a hello world here in the middle. We have that's in a text view, so you might normally think of that as some kind of label or text view, as it's called in Android. So if we go ahead and run this application, it's going to show hello world just like that. I'm not going to bother to do that and waste our time. But why don't we before we even worry about creating two activities in a web view and so forth, let's manipulate this simple GUI somehow. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the world part. All right, then I'm going to save that. And now let's put in a text box and a button so we can change it. So I'm going to find I'm going to filter by widgets. I'm going to take a plain text here and drag it in here. All right, by default it says name. Now you see over here that Android Studio is great at inserting things like this by wizard for you and then having a red there next to it. What Android Studio is trying to tell you is even though we've laid it out here in this design tool, that it'll actually, if you run the application, would appear up in 00 in the left corner, and that's because it's not constrained. You can use this magic wand up here to infer constraints, easiest thing to do, so I'm going to do that. Infer constraints. It adds stuff to the XML to indicate where those constraints should be. So we have a text box that will by default put the value name in there, but then we can manipulate that, of course, when we run the application. Then we're going to have let's add a button. Let's see, widgets, radio button, toggle button, check button. I got all kinds of buttons here. Where's my, just a regular button. That's all I was looking for. So I'm going to put that underneath here. And again, I'm going to infer constraints again to make sure that's on there. I'm going to change the value of this to, I'm going to say go. All right, on there, I'll save that. We have a very simple running UI at this point. I can run this UI. I've already got my emulator up, and again, as an opportunity just to go a little bit faster. So I'll click on run here. I'll select that device because I already have it up and going. I'll bring it to the foreground. Gradle's going to run its build, which I'm going to bring up this window, see the build. I'm going to bring up my logcat so you can see all the things going by, and then I'll bring up our emulator, and there it is, right? But of course, nothing happens, right? I can do stuff here. I can click go, blah, blah, blah. Nothing happens. All right, not so interesting. So in step 2 of this, let me go back. I'm going to kill this guy now. Actually, I'll kill it over here. I can use this red square to kill it. All right, I'm going to minimize this a little bit, get my code window just a little bit bigger so we can maximize our real estate. All right, so I'm not doing anything, of course, yet. So let's go back and start doing stuff with these widgets. Note when you're in this XML view what your IDs are. You have an ID of text view, edit text, and button. Those are just default things. You could rename those if you wanted. All right, well, let's go over here, right? So we have our on create of our bundle, if you will, with our bundle and so forth. We didn't go through that. That's if you want to save state after your application's killed. We're not going to worry about those kinds of things. So let's go through how we might want to do something just in the native UI again. Well, the first thing we got to do is if we want to do different parts, and I'm going to cut and paste in some stuff I had typed over the side just in the interest of saving time. All right. Now it's noticing I'm cutting and pasting things about buttons and text view, so it's going to add the imports for me. I've got to create these types. I have a go button. I have name text. That's for my edit text field and the button field. I'm going to add those as private member variables on my main activity. So I'm going to create my go button. All right, and I'm going to create my edit text name text here. And, you know, why don't we grab our third one just for the heck of it. So I'm going to grab, that was a type text view. And that's our hello text, I'll call it, as a variable name. I've got to add this one. You see Android Studio highlights in red. And I can just use its magic combination of Alt-Enter on my Mac, and it added that import. You can expand these imports. You see it's added there. Okay. And then I'm going to go down and grab that one. I'm just going to do a quick cut and paste here. All right, and this is going to be, instead of name text, we're going to use hello text. And instead of edit text, we're going to use text view. And its identifier over there was, what was its identifier again? Its identifier was text view. Okay. But lowercase, so I'm going to do text view. Okay, so I grabbed our three widgets. What kind of things can I do with them now? Well, I have a button. So what do I want to do on the button? Well, on the button, I want to make something happen. So I've got to add a listener. And again, I'm going to cut and paste this starting point just to move along a little bit faster. All right. Okay, so what did I just do here? I added to the Go button, the button on our UI, an on-click listener. So when you click on it, when you press on it, all right, a new view.onClick listener. That's where the on-click listener is defined. I'm creating an anonymous inner function, right? I'm instantiating an anonymous inner class with a single function that is that overridden event handler for on-click, all right? On-click takes a view type. That's why I had to add that to my imports. And all these things are different kinds of views. It extends views, so that's okay. And now I've got to go to that view type and go and get the value I want. Well, at this point, I'm trying to grab the value out of the text box that was typed in. So that's the name text that we created up here. I'm going to get its text. I've actually got to string it because you returned an Android-specific text type, and I'm going to trim off any white space in case the user added any white space to it. And I'm going to check that it's not null and that it's not empty. All right. Now, when I have all that, what do I want to do with it? Okay, so think of where I am. I closed in the UI view, right? We're saying somebody's going to type something into this text box, and they're going to click the Go button, and that's the event that we listen to. Well, why don't we try and make maybe a message come up on the screen, or maybe change the state of another UI widget, like the text view. So let's do that. I'm going to take our view text one, our hello text, and I'm going to change it. So I'm going to take the hello text. I'm going to set its text. It's just got a text setter on it, if you will. And I'm going to change it to hello plus the name. Hello space plus whatever we typed in there. Yes. Okay. That's one thing I could do. I also said, hey, let's pop up a message on the screen, perhaps. Well, there's a built-in facility for making toast. If you're hungry, a toast dot. Here we're just going to make a simple text message on our toast. You need the application context, which you can call a simple getter on because we are inside an application context, or all activities have an application context already. What do we want to say? We're going to say, okay, good name. I don't know, whatever. Let's indicate to toast how long we want this thing to be up. It's got some built-in identifiers. Its length short. And one thing you got to remember is you got to tell it to show itself. You're actually making the toast, but now you've actually got to show the toast on the screen. Now, what if we're not? I mean, it's not good to have a UI widget that is enabled like our Go button. We didn't disable it, and to click Go and have nothing happen, right? UI widgets that don't do anything, you're better off at least informing the user of what they did wrong. So let's do a toast make text again, but let's say something else. So what I'm saying here is we want to tell the user that, hey, you got to actually put in the name. Hey, put in a name, kind of thing. Let's ask that one to show a little bit longer. Okay, so we've got that. We've got to add our curly brace end of that. We've got to add our curly brace end of that, and we also got to close it like that. Okay, so we have now set up a listener for the Go button that's going to manipulate some of the native states. So let's go ahead and run this version and see how we do. All right, we're doing our Gradle build. Was successful. Logcat starts, comes up. All right, so let's change name to Joe. Let's say, see what happens. Hey, hello, Joe. Okay, good name, right? So both those things happened that we said would happen. Now, what if they were empty? So I've emptied this. Hey, put in a name. Okay, so our handler acts like we expect. We have the ability to handle this event. Now we want to make it so that we can bring up a web view activity somehow and make the Go button transition to that activity, which I will do next. Okay, so let's do the next part of this. Now we want to create a web activity, right? We actually want to put some web content in it and start working between this native activity, as it's called, and this web activity we're going to do. It's off screen right now. I'm going to the File, New menu. You probably see it just pop up on the side. Under New, there's all kinds of new options here, and you can have New Activity. Now, there's all different kinds of activities built in here. We kind of don't have the kind we want. We just want an empty activity again. All right. And now remember, there's not a thing called a web activity or a web. The web view is not a web activity. I'm going to call this web activity, but that's just the name of it, right? It's going to put it inside our package. We'll finish it and so forth. Now I brought up a second activity here. All right, and I have a second design. All right, this is different than our main screen design. Looks kind of similar, I know. All right, just refresh. This one's empty, as before. Now, to make this display web content, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our palette again, and we're going to look for a web view in here somewhere. All right, where the heck would that thing be? Well, there it is, web view. All right, I'm going to drag that on there. By default, it's full screen. Again, we want to infer constraints, the magic wand, and we're going to take up the full screen. Now notice, I mean, the web view doesn't have to take up the full screen. It can only take up part of the screen, so you can even mix web and native components on the same screen in Android. But for our intents and purposes, we're going to keep this as our web view. We have an ID of web view here. We have our empty activity with a web activity. And what I want to do with this is I want to add one of our built-in examples that we showed before in class. And so the one I'm going to pick is this general event handler. If you remember way back when we started the client side, one of the examples in the samples directory was the general events HTML and a corresponding JavaScript file. if you look, when I mouse over the second line, all right, it detects that mouse over and says wow in red. In this one, what happens when you click on it? It pops up an alert. All right, so I need to go find those files on my file system. All right, so I went over to that directory, General Events and General Events JavaScript. I'm going to copy them, all right, but I need to go into now the directory space of Android and put them in a particular place. Okay, so I'm going to go to that examples directory. That's where I've created my Android project, our SampleHybrid we're working on. And if you look at the directory tree, I have my source tree that has all my Java in it. But right now I don't have a place to put my web assets. All right, so to do that, and looking at another project, we're going to create an assets directory and then a www directory. All right, assets. And another new folder for www web assets, and I'm going to put those two files there. Now notice I haven't changed those files at all or anything else like that, but I'm going to put those files in there because I want to load and work with these local URLs. Okay, so that's the first part. In fact, if I go back over here and do a synchronize app, there's my assets folder has shown up. There's my www, and I can look at both of these. All right, if you remember it did that, there's your on off, and there's the HTML that does the mouse over and mouse out part, and the on click for that alert on that header tag. Okay, so that's all we got going on, but we got to go back to the web activity and actually make these things show. So I'm going to pause here for a second and come back and show you what I've done to do that. Okay, just a few seconds later, let's take a look at how I modified the onCreate of the web activity. First, I have to get that web view. All right, that web view that was just in the XML file over here for Activity Web. Just like I did a find by view by ID before, I'm getting the web view ID. And I'm going to put that in a web view type of variable, and I'm calling that browser. I recommend turning on the Set Web Contents Debugging enabled. Allows you to get a little more debugging information inside your logcat. Here I'm setting a new web Chrome client. There's web clients, web view clients, standard web view clients, and a Chrome client. The Chrome client comes with a few more bells and whistles already enabled. You actually can do either one in the context of this course, but I'm picking the web Chrome client. You can actually do both. Associated with the same web view. The web Chrome client is going to help us make sure that external links don't go somewhere else, for example, that they're handled within our own client as opposed to bringing it up the web browser and so forth. More on that in a little bit. But the main call that actually brings up brings a HTML content into our web view is to load a URL. And here we're using a local asset. So that assets directory is mapped in the build to Android_assets. There's our www, and there's our general events.html. Now, of course, I can say this and I can run it, right? Bring it up in our pixel. We'll run our build. Our logcat will come streaming out. But of course, I don't have any way right now to get to, right? To get to the web view. My launcher app was the initial main activity over here. So adding this web view hasn't helped us so far because we haven't actually navigated a way to get to it. The way we get from one activity to another is we express the second activity as an intent in the first activity, and then we're going to bind it to this button listener over here. So I'm going to go back, and over here we were changing the native activity here, and we did this kind of thing where we did a toast make text. Well, let's get rid of that. Let's no longer pop it. Let's instead, when the go button is clicked, let's bring up. All right, now I'm going to cut and paste some code here, just in the interest of time. Let's bring up. All right, another activity. Okay. So we're asking for a new intent to happen. That new intent is going to use a context. I'm just going to use the context from this activity and indicates what intent it wants to use, or what activity I should say. In this case, our web activity that we want to bring up. Now that creates the intent, and now I've got to tell Android I actually want to start a new activity, put it on the top of the activity stack, if you will, with a start activity call. That's inherited from activity anyway, so I don't have to have that associated with a class member variable. All right. Now I created an intent, and I told that intent that I wanted to create. That intent represents our web activity. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to stop the current application. I'm going to run this one. We're going to see hopefully that the build works. Okay, the build works. Let's go over to our emulator. We brought this up. Let's say hello to Sue. Now look at this. This will change real quick, but then you'll see our web activity comes up, right? Just like the browser version of this, we bring this version up. Let's click on the heading. Nothing happens. Mouse over. Nothing happens. What's wrong here? All right, that's what I want to talk about next. When we look at this over here in the web activity, we've loaded the URL, we've parsed the HTML, and we've loaded it, and we're running it and so forth. But we haven't done anything to say that certain things are enabled in this browser. Unlike a default web browser over here, like my Chrome browser over here, where these events are automatically turned on, we know we can turn them off by disabling JavaScript. Over in a web view, it's the opposite. We've actually got to turn on features that we want to use. And to do that, we need to grab the web settings and turn some things on. So again, I'm going to cut and paste some code in the interest of time. All right. I'm going to get a settings object associated with the web view, and then I'm going to set JavaScript enabled on it. All right. I said a couple other things here. Set allow universal access from file URLs. That will help you when you're doing AJAX calls. We're actually doing AJAX calls in this lab. I don't really need that. This also, the set DOM storage enabled will help you with using, say, session or local storage if it's available in that particular client. And again, you can go look at the Android API page for that. For other things that you may want to enable or disable, that's what web settings does. These two we don't strictly need, these last two, but I'm showing you them because they are relevant to some of the things you're asked to do in this class. So now JavaScript's enabled. So let's save this. Let's kill the previous version of the app. Let's go over here and run. We build successfully. We'll bring it up on the pixel. We'll say hello name. We'll go over here. Whoa, we got the red text. All right. In the emulator, you actually have to click on it to get it to work. And there's our alert that happened in the web view. Part of the reason I use the web Chrome client is the web Chrome client will actually support JavaScript alerts like this, whereas the normal web view client will not. That's part of the reason I selected that. Notice as well I can use my Android back button and go back to my native activity. I still have that state change over here. I can change the state, run it again, bring it in, and so forth. So we're going back and forth now. Now we figured out how to bring up a second activity, in this case an activity that has an embedded web view. We've loaded the code, the HTML and JavaScript code within. And notice I didn't have to modify the HTML or JavaScript. We enabled the web view to actually use the JavaScript that's inside it. But what haven't we done so far? Well, we haven't actually passed information back and forth yet between these two activities. So the next modification I'll do after a quick pause is show you how to pass this value, if you will, from the Java into the JavaScript, and then we'll talk about going from the JavaScript back into the Java. Okay, so the next part of what we want to do is we want to take that name that was typed in and pass it over into the web activity and do something with it in the web view. So we've got to start. I have the main activity up on it, which is again our native Java activity. We have that intent there, but now we want to take and put something and bring it over to the web activity. Once we have it in the web activity, then we've got to find a way to pass it into the JavaScript from that activity. This side's relatively straightforward. When I create the web intent, there are multiple ways actually for a web intent to bundle information and send it along, if you will, to the next activity. here we're just talking about one value. So the most straightforward API is something called put extra. All right, and we got to give it some identifier, some string name. So I'm going to call it name here, and then the value we want to send in this case, which is a string. That name was we just called s up above, right? So I send this part over, and now when I go into the web activity, I'll have access to something called name. And I'm going to cut and paste this code again in the interest of typing. So up here, before I worry about any of the web stuff, all right, I get the intent that I came from. I get the extra, so I had a put extra, I have a get extra. Here it's type specific, there's get string, get integer, and so forth. That way it tells us what the return value is supposed to be. And I use the same identifier name here, and that's going to get that value s that I passed over into here. And I'm making it a final here so I don't change it. You'll see why that is in a second. But I completed step one. All right, I passed from one activity to the next by bundling an extra name value pair inside the intent. All right, but now I want to use it inside of the web view somewhere. Well, the web view just brings up this HTML down here, so we've got to have something in the HTML or JavaScript that's actually going to do something with a value if it gets it. So I'm going to put in a little hook here, and again, I'm going to cut and paste this in the interest of time. I'm just going to add a little homegrown function right. I'm not even going to put it in the JavaScript file. I'm going to put it right here. All right. So I have a function foo that I'm adding. All right. And I'm just going to console.log it. I'm not even worried about DOM manipulation at this point, right? I'm at the top of the file anyway. I shouldn't be manipulating DOM. But I'm just going to put it in the console.log. And you'll actually see console.logs will come out in your log cap. Okay? So I've got 2/3 of this done now. I've got a hook. But now I've got to pass a string into. All right? Now, there's a few different ways that you would look up and find that you can pass information into a web view. One of them would tell you to load, I'll just show you real quick. One of them would tell you to do something like this, browser.load URL, and put like a JavaScript colon and then execute foo with, blah, whatever, okay? That way has been deprecated as of API level 19, okay? So a new way of doing it is to use a new function that's available called evaluate JavaScript. So instead you're going to have a call something like this. All right. I'm going to put this, I'll put it right here. Again, I cut and paste this. Now what does this do? This tells the browser to evaluate JavaScript. It gives in quotes, this is going to be a piece of JavaScript code. So I'm just calling the foo function we just created and inserting as a parameter the name value, which is taken from what we just got out of the intent. Okay. Now is this going to work? Well, let's try it out and see what it says. All right. Bring up my emulator. I'm going to bring that up. I'm just going to call it name. I'm going to hit go. Bring up that. Now, first is we still have our JavaScript working. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the log cat. We should have been seeing a console.log in here somewhere. All right, scroll up, see where it is. Uncaught reference error. Foo is not defined. Huh. Well, that's the right method, evaluate JavaScript, and then we know we have a function foo. We just cut and pasted it in here. It's in here directly. So what's the problem? The problem is this is all happening asynchronously between the web view running that JavaScript interpreter and this Java running, which means effectively I've got to wait until, right? I did evaluate JavaScript before this. Now, maybe I should put it after, right? I didn't actually load the URL yet, but I called the evaluate JavaScript. So let's put it after and see what happens. Okay. Let's stop that version. Let's bring this up. Let's do it again. All right. All right. So let's go back and try and find this uncaught reference error again. We still have it. Okay. What we really want to do, we want the equivalent of our DOM loading events, right? So, but we're on the Java side to do that. So how do we do that? Well, we can actually add, and again, I'm going to cut and paste this in. We're going to have a new, we'll take and set a WebView client and wait for an event that tells us the page is finished. All right. This is the same evaluate JavaScript call, but now I'm waiting for an on-page finish event. Okay. On this view, on this, well, those are the parameters, the view and URL that you get back. We don't actually need them in here. So I'm setting a WebView client. Now I already have a Web Chrome client here. I'm setting a WebView client, and I'm overriding the on-page finished event to say I want to execute this script when the page is finished loading. So let's see if we have more luck with that. All right, there we go. You see it scrolling by? Hello name. Okay. So we had to wait for the page finish event, just like our DOM content loaded, in order to get that guy going. Okay, so we just showed how to invoke some JavaScript from the Java side. We passed some information over to our activity holding our web view, and then we're able to use that value inside the web view by enabling JavaScript and by allowing the page to be finished. What if we want to go in the other direction? What if in the JavaScript we want to call some Java code? To do that, we have to create some methods, some functions that allow the JavaScript to call it. Okay, so I'm going to show you that. Again, I'm going to cut and paste in the interest of time. But I'm going to create another class, and I'm just going to put that class in my web activity. Okay. So I'm going to cut and paste at the bottom here. It's not a public class, just a regular class. It's going to add some additional imports for me. So I added a class web app interface, we called it. I'm hanging on to the context. I have a constructor that'll pass in a context. We need an application context for Android to know what context it's executing against. Notice I have two different class member functions here, a don't show me and a show me. Both of them are going to do a toast message, right? I'm on the Java side, all right? So what I'm going to try and do is invoke some JavaScript that's going to make these toast messages come up from the Java side. One that basically indicates that we're calling don't show me with the name, and one that is calling show me. Both along both show, okay? So very one-line methods. But the difference, obviously, you notice here is you see an annotation here with an @JavaScript interface that's only available on show me and not available on don't show me. Again, this is something I believe it was API level 19 that Android added. But now I have, all I did was create a class here. Now I've got to tell my web view again that I want to use that class and make it available to the JavaScript. All right, so again, I'm going to cut and paste this in here real quick. And you also have another sample code that does this as well that you can look at. The Android JS Interface 1, I think it's called, or something similar to that. In any event, I took my web view and added a JavaScript interface. Here I instantiate this class here. I pass in the application context that I require. And again, I just need some logical name. Now that's not to the constructor, but I'm adding this JavaScript interface under this logical name. Well, where do I use that? All right. Well, now I have to go into the JavaScript somewhere, or into the HTML somewhere, and use these things. All right. So I'm going to go into general events.html, And I'm going to add more code on these event handlers. And again, I'm inside the JavaScript here. I'm handling on-click events. I'm going to add a call to, let's call don't show me. All right, and I can add, it took a parameter, so I'll add Sue here, if you will. All right, and then how about on this other event, I'm going to go ahead and call the show me. Okay, so I have two different event handlers, one calling don't show me, one calling show me. Notice how I'm calling them through that logical name, right? So I basically passed in and gave this handle that says these methods are going to be available. Now think about what JavaScript's going to do with that dot notation. It's going to instantiate some kind of object with that and associate those functions with it, but it knows that it's got to turn around and call back through its hook back here, just instantiate a Java object where we have don't show me and show me. Okay, so let's go and try and run this one and see what happens. All right, I'm going to call my name. I have hello name that went by. All right, I'm running. So let's try the first one. Okay, I got my alert with an ouch. But I didn't see the toast message. Huh. What happened? Well, I've got one of these uncaught type errors again. Android don't show me is not a function. Okay. Well, let's try the other one. Show me Joe shows up down here, as well as the JavaScript event. So one click on here, right? That does it both when I click it to release it. One click inside of here causes two different things, one on the JavaScript side, one on the Java side. So why didn't it work up here? All right, uncaught type error. Well, the reason goes back to I didn't have the annotation, right, on here. And that annotation is required. So basically, it's not all the methods on a class. You have to annotate, all right, which ones you want to actually make a JavaScript interface available. So I'll add that here. I'll go back and rerun real quick. All right, we'll go in, and now I'll click on this. I got the alert, and I got... Now notice how those, because the alert is a modal dialog, notice how one happened before the other. But in any event, they happen on both now. Okay? So, let's recap what we did through here. We created a native activity. On that native activity, we had a button, an edit text and text view. That text was our text box as we traditionally do it. We typed something into that text box. If it was non-empty, we went ahead and set the text in a native widget first, and then we passed that information over to an intent that would start a new activity, and we passed it over using the put extra. On the other side, on the web activity, we created and associated a web view. In that web view, we're able to get that information that was passed over via that logical name. We bring up the web view. We set a number of different properties and clients. Remember to set your client. Remember to set various things on the properties by getting the settings, setting JavaScript enable. You're going to want things to use for Ajax, things to use for local storage. If we want to evaluate some JavaScript, again, more than one way to evaluate the JavaScript. It is even necessary with an on-page finished. But if you want a hook that when the DOM is finished loading, that you want to evaluate something in the JavaScript, you can associate it in this way. And here's just some plain JavaScript that's being executed inside this string. It is a best practice, if you will, to put whatever hook you want in its own encapsulated function. Here I put it in the top up here with right in the HTML. You could have put it in the JavaScript file as well, either one. But normally you don't write out longhand a whole bunch of JavaScript here. You encapsulate it in a function on the JavaScript side, and then you use this one line to invoke it. And we are even able to pass in a value. Right now we're console logging, but we could have done anything we wanted. We could have inserted that name into the DOM somewhere if we wanted through our standard DOM manipulation. So that's going from the Java to the JavaScript way. When we want to go from the JavaScript to the Java way, all right, we add a JavaScript interface. We typically, best practice would say to encapsulate this thing in a class. we annotate the methods that we want to make available to JavaScript to call back to Java by using the JavaScript interface annotation. Then we indicate what string handle we want to find it under on the JavaScript side, and then on the JavaScript side, wherever we want, we can invoke that Java code back in the native side. And again, these things don't, we're doing toast messages because that's the simplest way to know something executed, that in console.logs, right? But we could have passed information, right? We could have grabbed information on a local storage and passed it back to the Java side. We can do whatever we want. It's open-ended code, okay? So in terms of passing information back and forth, those are the two directions. From a design perspective, sometimes you really have to think about when things happen and where and what the life cycle of things are. Remember the first time we had a problem with this evaluate JavaScript. We've got to make sure that the activity even exists and is in that state to exist. We've got to think about our activity life cycle events. What happens if our activity gets killed and then we bring it back up? Are we in the right event handler and so forth, or state change listener, if you will, to make that happen? But from a basic perspective, we put it all on create. We passed or invoked JavaScript from the Java side, and then we invoke Java from the JavaScript side.